genitalia.
Y'all let me down last time, so I'm done.
Just straight at him.
Ow.
I looked at him.
No, we did.
Oh, is he female genitalia?
No.
I just recorded that
Because
too.
of the comment I made last time.
Oh, I don't know what you said. But it's probably safer that I don't. It's probably safer. So we're going to talk about some female genitalia in a biological perspective, from a biological perspective. So initially when babies are developing, you can't tell. They're what we call sexually indifferent for about 4 to 5 weeks in utero. If you were to do a sonogram, because the baby is super tiny, it would be very easy to mix up the sexes. So sometimes you say it's a boy and it ends up being a girl, and vice versa. Both individuals, whether you're male or female, have the exact same structures. But based on the hormones that are present, they either develop into male structures or female structures. So yesterday, as we were talking about the penis and the scrotum, we have the exact same structures in a female. That they don't function identically because they're a different individual, but same tissue as the scrotum is the labia in the female. Same tissue as the penis is the clitoris in the female. So they have analogous structures that are unique to the sexes. So erectile tissue for female is the clitoris. Erectile tissue for the male is the penis. So the structures that you don't technically become where you can visually tell the difference in the sexes of a baby until that baby's around 6 weeks, 7 weeks along. And then it may still be a stretch. So if, when you go to the doctor when you become pregnant, they won't usually do sex-determining sonograms until you're 20 weeks along. And at that point, they're pretty sure. But it's possible, like, that you have a boy, they say, oh, you're having a boy, and then you go back a month and a half later and it's actually turning into a girl. So it's possible that those tissues still stay swollen. For a female, previously we talked about that females have 3 external openings. They have the urethra, which is where they void urine, not used for reproduction. The vagina, which is the birth canal and used for reproduction. And the rectum, which voids the digestive system and not used for reproduction. When we look at just the vagina, because we're just covering the reproductive system, the vagina leads to the cervix, which is the opening of the uterus. And in a non-pregnant female, the cervix is about the size of the tip of a pin. It's very, very small. When a female goes into delivery after she becomes pregnant and she's 40 weeks along, that small structure that's the size, the tip of a pin, has to dilate 10 centimeters so that a baby can come through. So the cervix is the access point and the delivery point, access point for sperm and delivery point for a baby. We're also going to look at the uterus, and we're going to focus on the endometrium. The endometrium is the very internal lining of the uterus, and this endometrium for a female, a pubertal female, which means she's having puberty or she's cycling through, every month her uterus builds a new layer, and if she doesn't become pregnant, her uterus kills that entire layer, and then it will regrow another one in 14 days. If she doesn't become pregnant, it'll kill that, it'll regrow. So it's the endometrium that cycles through and is constantly refurbished every month. I am going to go to a picture first because I feel like I can always show you on the pictures, and then I can go back to the terms. So we have a sagittal view. This shows the 3 openings of the female, the urethra, the vagina, and the rectum. The vagina, other than accommodating penis, it's what we call the organ of copulation. The vagina is nothing more than a muscle. So its only role in reproduction is to get the penis as close as possible to the cervix. This cervix right here is that pin tip opening that I mentioned just a moment ago. In a 28-day month, it is only open 2 days. So there's only, at most, 48 hours in a month that the sperm can actually ascend the reproductive tract and impregnate a female. The other 26 days, and I'm using 28 because the textbook numbers are a 28-day cycle. The other 26 days, this cervix has a mucus plug. It's a mucus layer. Mucus plug is when you're pregnant. But anyway, it has a layer of mucus that will not allow sperm in. So in the event that a male does ejaculate inside of the vagina, it will all come right back out. So it will not ascend the reproductive tract. She will not become pregnant because she can't. Yes, sir?
All these teen pregnancies, is either really bad timing or on purpose?
No, it's what we call, it's just a natural cycle. When a female is ovulating, she puts off a scent, and boys smell it. And they're attracted to it. And it turns them on, and then they want to have sex with her, and she likes the attention, so they have sex, and she gets pregnant.
Whoa.
It's literally, that's exactly what it is. As soon as a female, leading up to ovulation, she begins to release a pheromone, which is a biological chemical that certain males pick up on. And they automatically spend more time, they pay her more attention because they smell it. Now, do they know that's what they smell? No, they're just for some reason, they're like, for some reason today, I'm really attracted to her. And that's what, I promise, it's completely scientifically explained. So when you say it's really bad timing, it's actually nature's timing. Like, it's a thing. It's a thing. It's 100% explainable. So, I talked about the 26 days versus the 2 days. Okay, let's look at, here is just the female reproductive structures. We have the uterus, and then both the fallopian tubes, and then these structures here are the ovaries. In the video we watched, Thursday or Friday, I showed you that during that time, the woman was able to become pregnant. So it talked about there was a thinning of the mucus, so the sperm was capable of ascending the reproductive tract, and half the sperm went to the left, and half the sperm went to the right. Sperm follow an olfactory scent, so they can smell the egg. If the egg is on the right side, and they go to the left side, are they going to fertilize it? No. So, I mean, if there's 300 million sperm in that ejaculation, only one's going to win. So half of them are going to make the wrong choice. All right. So when that sperm continues and then it comes through the fallopian tube, the egg should be around this area when it becomes fertilized. If the egg is fertilized closer to when it was ovulated, she's going to conceive a boy. If it is fertilized in this area, she'll become pregnant with a female. So at the beginning of ovulation, she will conceive boys. Towards the end of her ovulatory cycle, she will only conceive girls. And it has to do with her body temperature. Okay? She'll become pregnant here. So we have a fertilized zygote. It will continue to cleave. We're going to talk about cleavage later, but it's the cells it's dividing in numbers, but it's not getting bigger because this right here won't stretch. In the event that the baby gets stuck right here and tries to grow, it will either kill the baby or kill the mama. And we call it an ectopic pregnancy if it gets stuck here. But this baby, this fertilized baby, will come and implant itself in the uterus. And we want it to implant around this area of the uterus. If the egg is fertilized here, which is definitely possible, it doesn't have enough time to implant because it takes about 6 to 7 days after. And during that 6 to 7 days, it actually just makes its way out, and it can't implant. If the egg implants in this opening right here, it's going to miscarry because that area doesn't stretch until you go into delivery. The cervix won't stretch until delivery. So both ovaries are housed with their eggs. We're going to see that. They're oocytes. And they should, once the female reaches puberty, they should alternate. Which one is ovulating or releasing an egg? So 1 month one will, 1 month the next will. And they usually alternate. It is possible that both ovaries release an egg and she becomes pregnant with twins. It is possible that she doesn't ovulate at all and she never becomes pregnant. So all of those are definite possibilities. The ovary itself is not physically touching this right here is what we call the fallopian tube. It's also called the uterine tube. It's also called the oviduct. They aren't physically touching, so you have the ovary, and then the uterine tube kind of comes over it like this. When an egg is released, this structure here is called fimbriae. These are turned on, and for a short time they create a current that tries to waft the egg into the fallopian tube. Not all eggs make it, and if the egg doesn't make it, it just disintegrates in her body, and she just doesn't become pregnant that month. But the goal is that once the egg is released, that it gets wafted into the uterine tube, and hopefully, what naturally biologically wants to occur is that that female becomes pregnant, because the whole goal of all the species is to procreate. Now, once the woman has become pregnant, the uterus, this structure here, does not stay this size. And I don't want to say obviously because a lot of people don't understand that. As the baby grows, the uterus is a muscle, so it gets bigger. The uterus in a full-term pregnancy is about the size of a basketball and a half. So it's really large, accommodating that baby. Okay? This opening right here is the cervix. And when they talk about the female dilating, that cervix, which is very, very tiny in an unpregnant woman, has to dilate 10 centimeters. And that takes anywhere from 10 to 12 hours to 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the female and her level of hormones. So once this structure here has dilated 10 centimeters, the baby can be delivered head first, and the vagina, which is just a muscle, will stretch momentarily. The baby will come out, and within 6 weeks, everything should be kind of healed up. But it is a very traumatic experience for both the female and for the child. So there's always a healing time, a natural healing time for that tissue afterwards. Any questions so far? I'm going to go back to the terms to make sure I covered everything. I did say a little bit extra, but okay. So it mentions that the oocytes develop in one of the two ovaries. Typically one is released and it's drawn into the oviduct or the fallopian tube with the fimbriae. Then it is moved down the oviduct. If it's fertilized, it implants. When sperm and egg meet and you're just one cell big, you're called a zygote. By the time it implants, that baby should be anywhere from 32 to 150 cells. And when you're in that range of cells, we call you a blastocyst. You don't look like a baby. You don't look like a baby for a long time. You're just a big ball of cells. But when you're a big ball of cells that's anywhere from 32 to 150 cells, we call you a blastocyst. Oops. Okay, so oogenesis. This is another topic that you and I have discussed previously, that all females are born with all the eggs that they're going to ovulate. So they're all made while she's developing embryonically and in her fetal stages. So by the time she's born, she has all of her eggs. But by the time she hits puberty, many of them have degenerated or disintegrated because they've run out of food source. But still, even if she has 200,000 eggs left, she still couldn't potentially ovulate all 200,000 eggs in her lifetime. The ovarian cycle versus the uterine cycle. So what we're about to discuss in a female, and for some of you this is going to like, what? I have no idea. There are two cycles that occur at the same time, but in different places. There is the ovarian cycle. That is a 28-day cycle that occurs in the ovary. And then there's the uterine cycle, which is a 28-day cycle that occurs in the uterus. They are simultaneous. They're happening at the exact same time and on the same clock, but they're occurring in two different places. And I'm going to say, like in anatomy, I reference this all the time, it's a textbook 28, meaning that we say 28 because that's what is used in all the textbook. Is it possible that your cycles could be off days? Yes. Okay, so we're just going to go with textbook numbers as I teach you these cycles. So the ovarian cycle is 28 days. And I'm going to show you a diagram of an ovary, and we'll talk about how the eggs kind of go through a maturation phase. If a female hits menopause, that means that she has ovulated all of her potential eggs, or they've disintegrated. So menopause means, by definition, she can no longer become pregnant, which we've seen exceptions to that, but that's what menopause is. Questions so far? Okay, I'm going to go to this ovary real quick, and then I'll go back to the words. So here's the ovary. I'm gonna use a calendar year because it just makes sense, but the beginning of your year would be whenever you initially started ovulating or hit puberty. But let's say it's December. So in December, a whole bunch of eggs get summoned, and they're like, hey, this is your year to be ovulated. So here we kind of have our storage of eggs that are going to be potentially ovulated during this next calendar year. Each month, one is chosen. And the one that is chosen begins to differentiate more. It goes through a little bit more meiosis, but I'll remind you that the female body does not waste energy on meiosis unless it becomes fertilized. So sperm go through the whole process, 6 to 8 weeks, so that every single sperm is created perfectly. The eggs, they go a little bit and they stop. They go a little bit more and they stop. And if they don't get fertilized, they put no more effort into it. So here, we call this the follicle. The egg right here, our oocyte, it has its 2 layers that we looked at in the video. At this point, it's ovulated. So this is roughly 14 days, textbook numbers. On day 14, the egg is ovulated, and it should be wafted in to the oviduct. This structure here that's left becomes this structure, which we call the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will secrete hormones, which will, if this egg becomes fertilized, which will keep the female's body from losing the baby. It'll produce hormones for 3 months so that she can maintain the pregnancy. If she does not become pregnant, the corpus luteum will shrivel up and form a scar on her ovary. So every single time that ovary ovulates and does not successfully fertilize, there's a scar left on that ovary. So potentially on an older woman, you would have a whole bunch of little tiny scars. There's not a good picture of a uterus in here until like the very, very end. During this time, this 28-day cycle, this is the ovarian cycle occurring in the ovary. A similar cycle is taking place in the uterus. At this point, the uterus has, because it didn't become pregnant here, everything inside the uterus, the endometrium, is being sloughed off. That's when a female menstruates. So all of that tissue dies, and she has her menstrual cycle. Once all that tissue is removed, it immediately begins to start building up a new layer, hoping to become pregnant that month. When this egg is ovulated, the layer continues to prepare to become pregnant. In the event that she doesn't become pregnant, it shrivels up, everything falls out, and we start all over again. And these cycles literally fall with each other day to day. Day 14, in ovulation, the uterus is almost completely ready to house this new baby. In the event that the female does become pregnant, the uterus continues to grow and become nurturing in order to raise that baby, form a placenta, and of course temporarily raise that baby and form a placenta until birth. So the uterus, every single month, if it doesn't become pregnant, it is the internal lining, the endometrium, is sloughed off and replaced. Here we go here. Ovarian cycle. During the first week, several oocytes begin to develop, each within a follicle. By the second week, only one follicle is brought forward. So it's like, hey, it's your month. This one gets picked. It continues to go over through meiosis, but then stops. Okay? And then once it stops, there's a surge of hormones. That surge of hormones causes ovulation. At ovulation, the follicle will rupture, releasing the egg. That empty follicle will then become the corpus luteum. That's that structure I was showing you that swells up. It secretes progesterone, which will allow for that female to sustain a pregnancy until placenta is formed. If there's no pregnancy, the corpus luteum will shrivel up and turn into a scar, and the uterus, the internal lining of the uterus, will be sloughed off. Are there questions there so far? Okay. This continues to talk about what I just showed you on that ovary. It's just giving you the details specifically. So the follicular phase, let me show you where I'm talking about follicular. So here is my oocyte, my primary oocyte. This structure here is what we call the follicle. Okay, so when it's talking about the follicular phase, it's talking about the differentiation of that tissue there. So during the follicular phase, there's growth and differentiation of the follicle, which makes sense. We have low levels of hormones. This is when a female's pretty much feeling like steady. These are her good days, and I mean that in a very respectful way. Because when she has surges of hormones, a lot of females don't know how to act, and they don't know how to compensate for that. Men, when they have surges of hormones, we discussed that yesterday, the testosterone levels, well, that may happen once in a while for them, but for a female it happens on a regular basis. So this time right here, hormone levels are pretty steady. When they do start to increase, it's a very slight increase, so it's not like a huge surge that would be overwhelming to them. And all of a sudden they're super emotional. Okay, so it begins to develop that follicle stimulating hormone, allows for further development. When the follicle is ready, there will be a surge of hormones. A surge of hormones will cause two things to happen in the female. She will run a fever, and she will ovulate. Every single time a woman ovulates, she runs a low-grade fever. This is explaining why she feels bad for like 12 hours. She's like, I don't know why, I just don't feel right, I'm tired. It's because of that surge of hormones. But it's like it goes up and goes right back down. When it goes up and goes right back down, it causes that follicle to rupture and it releases that oocyte. When they do ovulatory trackers, so that a female who may be having trouble becoming pregnant can figure out what days she can become pregnant, they literally track your temperature. When you run a fever, that's when you ovulate. And it's a very low-grade fever. It's not like it's 102, 103. It's like if your basal body temperature is 98, it's like 99.1. And it's just a low-grade fever where you just kind of don't feel like doing anything for a while. But then later on in that day, you're fine. Okay? And, of course, it mentions that spike in hormones causes ovulation. All right. So here, the follicle is continuing to mature. We've gone through meiosis, and here it is ovulated. Oops. The luteal phase is talking about how that follicle becomes the corpus luteum. If fertilization does occur, it will produce human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. That hormone which tells that female's body that she is pregnant. If no fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum will degenerate, her hormone levels will drop, causing another personality fluctuation, and she'll begin her menstrual cycle within usually 48 to 72 hours. Okay, so this is that corpus luteum. So the follicle here becomes the corpus luteum. She's pregnant if it's swollen like that. She is not if it degenerates or shrivels up. And we have until 20, right? I'm almost done. I just want to make sure I don't want it to run 15. Okay, so this, like I said, the same cycle, same time frame is taking place cycle-wise in the uterus. We call it the uterine cycle. Some people also reference it as the menstrual cycle, so either one works. But when a female is menstruating, it's because the corpus luteum has said you have not become pregnant, so it shrivels up, hormone levels drop, and her uterus begins to slough off all of that tissue. Other mammals do the same thing, but they don't have the bleeding with it. And a menstrual cycle is not technically bleeding. I know some of you don't even want to hear that, but it's just tissue. And the reason that it has like that reddish color is because it once did have blood, but it's not an active bleeding. Like you're not internally bleeding and it's like falling out. Okay. The proliferative phase is after the menstrual cycle is finished. The proliferative phase, the uterus is starting to build itself back up, the endometrium. The secretory phase is after ovulation has occurred. It's ready for implantation. It wants to have a baby in there. If the embryo does not implant, that lining is shed. So we have our menstrual cycle. If the embryo does implant, then we have a pregnant female. Okay, this diagram is one of my absolute favorites because it shows this is what this inside of the uterus looks like. So she didn't become pregnant, everything falls off, and then we begin to grow a new one. We're ready to become pregnant, She doesn't become pregnant, falls off. We start a new one. Pregnant, no pregnancy, falls off. This is happening in the uterus. This is happening in the ovary at the exact same time. When the female is menstruating, her follicle has been summoned and said, hey, it's your month to ovulate. At this point here is when she actually ovulates, releases that egg. You can also see that here's that surge of hormones I spoke about. Like literally, she's cool on hormones, and then all of a sudden she's like, ah. And she's like, I don't know why I'm being mean today. That's why. Then it goes right back down. The corpus luteum, right here, it's not sure if she's going to become pregnant, so we're kind of waiting. If she doesn't become pregnant, it shrivels up, and we start this cycle all over again. So this is occurring in the uterus. This is occurring in the ovary. And this is where I needed to get to today. What questions did you guys have?